Does my win include my family?
Can you apply for a family member from a different country?
How do I respond to my marital status?
What information is required for somebody who is not married to a US citizen?
And how about if you're married to a spouse who is a US citizen? If we're married, do we need to both of us have passports to apply for the DV lottery?
What information is required if you're legally separated? What status do you put in the case where you're about to get married or are engaged?
What if we're married customarily? Can we proceed to make the application as a married couple? Yes, you can, because in African societies, as long as the country legally acknowledges customary marriages as actual marriages, as long as you can defend it, yes, you can actually proceed to make that application if you can prove that indeed there was a customary marriage, and you need to have witnesses, and you also need to provide documentation, legal documentation in the form of swearing an affidavit that actually there was a customary marriage that happened on this day, and you provide the witnesses and you provide the proof of maybe pictures and such things. Then in that case, it will be justified if you actually say that you're customarily married and not necessarily legally married. However, please note that will only pass for the application, okay? But by the time of the interview, it's mostly the US Embassy rules that reign, okay? Yes, they'll acknowledge that you're customarily married, but for you to be able to process the DV lottery visa, specifically, they need to have a marriage certificate as per American laws. So that gives you a window of, let's say, by the time you're actually selected as a winner, please provide the marriage certificates. That means you'll have to probably go the legal way and not just the customary way. What if I'm married to one wife in accordance to African culture? This is actually in the constitution of some African societies and some African countries. Kenya specifically, I think that law was passed and recognized that you can actually have two wives. The thing is, it's American law that will reign. It's American embassy and American law will reign. So they absolutely do not recognize two wives. They only recognize one man for one woman. So unfortunately, you take the woman that is actually married legally. If at all, you have to apply. Otherwise, are you going to live with the fact that you've left your other wife and your other children home? I don't know, but there's only one wife and one husband in American law, and in the DV lottery application, there won't be any other slot for any other person. Can someone who is married to a refugee and they have children succeed in the DV lottery? They've been married legally in the court of law. This is a tricky one because being a refugee, does he or she have a passport? Because there are refugees that have passports, and there are those ones that do not have passports. If they do have a passport, then by all means, do proceed to make the application. So for one of the spouses who's not the refugee, if he or she has a passport, then I believe he or she can still make the application for the DV lottery. Because one of the requirements of the DV lottery is that the primary applicant has to have a passport. The catch is, however, in the case where the refugee does not have a passport, it could get tricky. It may not necessarily go through. And even if it does go through, in the event that it actually does, you'll still be required to go for the visa interview. And at that point in time, your entire family needs to have a passport. And is the refugee able to get a passport? That's the thing. In that case, it could get really complicated, and chances are it may actually not be possible unless if special exemptions are made, but it could get very tricky. What if the principal applicant that won the DV lottery dies? Will the family still get the green card? Oh, yeah, that's a misfortune. It depends. It depends on when the primary applicant actually passed on. Because between the date of submitting your application, which is basically on the 10th of November 2020, and by the time that you're actually knowing whether you've been selected or not as a successful applicant, that's 8th of May next year. That's already a significant time. Is that the duration in which that the primary applicant passed on? Or even after May 8th, when you've known whether you've been selected, thereafter, there's a date in which you'll be given to attend the interview. As long as the primary applicant passed on before he or she was able to attend the visa interview and be granted the visa. If it's before that, it's so unfortunate that no, the family actually will not be able to get the green card or even go to the US as a permanent residency at that point in time. Why? Because unfortunately, the application is pegged on the primary applicant and his or her fate. So if the primary applicant is not able to attend the interview, then that's it. It's game over, unfortunately. However, if the primary applicant died after attending the visa interview and had already been granted a visa, then the family will be able to go to the US as green card holders because their green card is not pegged. It's not pegged anymore on the primary applicant because it just comes as you have been granted this visa. It's just your names. So the family members at that point in time will be able to go. But unfortunately, if they've not attended the visa interview and if they had not been granted the visas prior to that, then they are unfortunately not able to. What information is required for children while making the DV lottery application? Children can fall in 3 different categories. They can be your biological children, they can be your adopted children, and they can be your stepchildren. So all of them, as long as they're your children, you can be able to include them all under your application and under your spouse's application. So let's start with the biological children. The details that you need to include are their gender, their date of birth, their birth city, their birth country, and you need to also input their digital picture. So for the adopted children, please note, you can only include adopted children if you've actually gone the legal way, if you've legally adopted them. So even if you have a local arrangement, maybe they didn't have parents and then you took them on under your shelter and have raised them, or even if, let's say, you have a local arrangement with their parents, and you literally consider them as yours, as long as you've not gone the legal way, then unfortunately you cannot include them in your application as your adopted children. You'll just have to leave them behind if you grant the visa. So for those that you've legally adopted, you need to include all those details that I've already mentioned for the biological children, in addition to now the adoption papers, okay? As for the stepchildren, please ensure that you're actually married to either the father or the mother of those children before you proceed to include them in your application. And I mean married, not in a relationship with, not dating, not almost married or engaged to their father or their mother. I mean actual marriage, so that you're legally also able to include them in your application. Otherwise, the penalty is instant disqualification, refusal of other visas, or revocation of the visas that you've been granted for US. You must ensure that you also don't miss out on any legal children of yours from the application. Otherwise, that will also attract a penalty of instant disqualification. However, there are special situations whereby a parent is actually not required to include their child in the application. And this is in the case of the child being a US citizen or permanent resident while the parents are not. Maybe at some point in time, the mother of the child was in the United States, maybe for studies or whatever other reasons. And then at that point in time, they gave birth to a child who automatically became a US citizen. However, the parent does not have the citizenship or permanent residence, and the mother left the USA to either another country or back home, and therefore is no longer in the USA. So that child will always still have US citizenship as much as either she's in the US or away from the US. So for that situation, you do not include that child in your application, as the child will not require a visa. What of the case whereby you're expecting a baby, maybe even very soon, and you're tempted to include him or her in your application? Now, actually, you're not required to include a baby who's not yet born. Even if it's just 1 day difference between when the child is born and when you're actually submitting the application, you still cannot include the child until the child is actually born. In case you end up being successful, you'll just update the embassy with the news and you'll provide the documentation. And as long as the date of birth happened after you submitted the application, all will be fine. The child will also be included in your application and you'll be able to get the green card visa for the child as well. What happens if you get married after applying for the DV lottery? So you made your initial application as a single person, and even though you're now selected to proceed with the DV lottery, you are now married and your status has changed. So now you want to include your spouse so that you both go to the USA together with that green card. And that's perfectly okay. It's within your rights to do so. How you are meant to do it, however, differs based on at what point in time you are with the visa application procedure and at what point you got married. As long as the marriage certificate is dated a day after submission, that's okay. That's one. The second thing is, have you been married before the visa interview or after the visa interview, after already the visa has been granted? Because that makes a big difference. So if you actually included your spouse before the visa interview, then it's so much streamlined. You're both going to get the visa and go to the USA. However, if you'd already attended the visa interview as a single person and had not yet been married at that point in time, then it's going to take a little bit longer. It's not as streamlined as if you'd actually attended the visa interview with your spouse. So the US government has a hierarchy in which they give priority, and the first people that they give priority to are the US citizens. So first is their spouse, and then their children, and then their parents. And then after that is when they can give priority to the permanent residents or the green card holders. First with their spouse, and then their children, and then finally their parents. So considering that hierarchy, it's now going to take a much longer time for you as the green card holder now to bring your spouse to the USA to join you. It's much easier if you had done it prior to attending the visa interview. That process of bringing your spouse will now have to take more than even 3 years. Be equipped with the right information by ensuring you continue to watch this DV lottery series up till the end. Get all the right information so that you not only ace your application, but also your interview if you're successful. Thanks guys, please give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.